Synod on the Amazon. The Vatican's 3-week meeting ends with the call for married men to be ordained as priests in the region. We have a report from Rome, plus reaction from one of the participants. Brought to justice.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead.
President Trump makes an announcement about the fugitive leader of ISIS. And put on hold. We have analysis on the new developments in Britain's attempt to leave the European Union. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, October 28, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Mark Irons. Church leaders gathered at the Synod for the Amazon voted to recommend married priests and a larger role for women in the church.
Que todavía no nos hemos caído en la cuenta de lo que significa la mujer en la iglesia.
Pope Francis said we need to go beyond the practical work of women and see how they can transmit faith and culture. This comes after 180 church leaders voted to an open discussion on the diaconate for women and for ordaining married men to overcome a shortage of priests. The final recommendations were released on Saturday after the 3-week-long meeting on the Amazon region. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Edward, tell us more about the main developments from the Synod according to this final document.
Yes, well, the 3 key paragraphs of this document, Mark, which were probably the most contested issues, is what a lot of people are talking about. The first one is the ordination of married men, mature married men in the Amazon region to cater for a shortage of priests in the remote parts of the region. They propose to establish criteria and dispositions for that measure. They also proposed further discussion of women deacons and a permanent diaconate for women. They also proposed that there be an elaboration on an Amazonian rite specifically for the region. And they also proposed a special church body to deal with the Amazon that would be totally dedicated to it, a sort of observatory, they called it.
And so what's next, particularly on those contested issues? How are they expected to be taken forward?
Right, well, the viri probati, as it's called, the ordination of married men, that's possibly going to go ahead. It depends, of course, on the Pope, as all of these 3 issues do. The ordination of women deacons, that's going to be carried forward with a commission that was started in 2016, which the Pope wants to continue and to restart, if you like. That actually came to an end this year. And then the other issues regarding the Amazonian rite and so forth, those really, again, depend on the Pope and what he puts in his final document, or his document of reflection on the Synod.
And the Pope mentioned some of the issues during his closing address and homily. Did he give any indications on how he will decide about these issues?
No, I mean, he said quite blatantly that he doesn't know if he's going to accept these or not, but he wants time to think and to have good time to reflect. He said that he would hope to produce this document by the end of the year. He doesn't have to produce it, but he wants to. But he also talked about just really about his wishes for this synod, and that he really thinks it could really help the region, and that he hopes that it will bring a lot of these issues to the fore in this final document that he's going to produce probably by Christmas, he thinks.
We'll be paying close attention. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mark.
We also sat down with one of the Pope's closest advisors to discuss these developments. You'll hear what he told us coming up. We're also following major developments in the war on terror. President Trump made a special address to the nation on Sunday morning to announce the death of the most wanted terrorist in the world.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. He was the founder and leader of ISIS, the most ruthless and violent terror organization anywhere in the world.
President Trump describes the daring U.S. military operation that killed the terror leader in graphic detail. He says al-Baghdadi did not die a hero.
He died after running into a dead-end tunnel, whimpering and crying and screaming all the way.
And the president says the terror leader dragged 3 of his young children into the tunnel with him, killing them too when he ignited his explosive vest.
He was a sick and depraved man, and now he's dead.
The president spoke about the raid again today while talking to police chiefs gathered in Chicago. On the way there, he praised what he calls an amazing display of intelligence and military power and coordination. No U.S. troops were killed in the battle at the compound in Syria. Defense Secretary Mark Esper says American troops will continue President Trump's push to leave Syria, but they will still secure oil fields to keep them from falling into the wrong hands.
Baghdadi's death will not rid the world of terrorism or end the ongoing conflict in Syria, but it will certainly send a message to those who would question America's resolve and provide a warning to terrorists who think they can hide.
The White House says the operation that killed al-Baghdadi was named after an American who was kidnapped and killed by ISIS after she visited a Doctors Without Borders hospital in 2013. Kayla Moeller traveled to the Turkey-Syria border in 2012 to do humanitarian work. Her family wants her to be remembered as someone with a tender heart. Allies are using the intelligence they gathered from this weekend's raid to go after more ISIS leaders. Kurdish forces say they killed a spokesman for ISIS in a joint operation with U.S. troops in northern Syria. Abu Hassan al-Muhajir was the right-hand man for al-Baghdadi. Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders was asked if President Trump deserves credit for the U.S. military raid in Syria that killed the ISIS leader.
That mission was accomplished with information supplied by the Kurds. And as we know, Trump has turned his back and betrayed the Kurds.
Democratic Senator Chris Coons also accuses the president of disrespect for not notifying congressional Democrats before making the al-Baghdadi news public. President Trump says he didn't inform the so-called Gang of Eight, top Democrats and Republicans in both chambers, because one of them, Adam Schiff, is, quote, the biggest leaker in Washington, according to President Trump. Schiff is leading the impeachment probe against the president. Joining me now with his analysis is Matthew R.J. Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
Let's talk about how important is the death of al-Baghdadi in the fight against ISIS.
I think it's a very important milestone. It's an achievement, something clearly that President Trump had outlined was one of the chief targets that he wanted to take care of. That part is very important. However, ISIS is not defeated around the world. While it's a milestone, it makes it harder for them to reconstitute, but it's still something that we're going to need to keep a very close eye on.
And this raid took place in northwest Syria, not far from the border with Turkey. Let's talk about this area in particular. Is it gaining more significance in the fight against terror, this area?
It's always been very significant for one primary reason. With Russia teaming up with Assad to take back parts of the country, they've really shipped out a lot of other terrorists that they've in territory that they've captured into this area. So it's a breeding ground, and it's an area that Russia and Turkey have some consternation between each other. It's a major population center that still has yet to be brought under effective Russian control or Turkish control. So we'll see terrorism emanating from there, and it's where al-Qaeda is still quite present.
And with the recent pullback of U.S. troops from that area, we heard bipartisan criticism here in Washington over that move from the president. How concerning is that? Could ISIS regain strength? And what does this operation tell us about the need to have U.S. presence in that part of the world?
I think it's crucial. And I think what we were doing in Syria, in northeastern Syria, was the exact way we should have done something, which is with just 1,000 of our own troops and a very small commitment, and with Kurdish people doing the fighting for us along with the Syrian Democratic Forces, other people were involved in this. We had really achieved a large amount of leverage that we could use with Russia, with Turkey, and with anyone else that really wanted what we had. So in essence, we are able to use our intelligence assets far better if we are on the ground there. I think it'll be a mistake to really pull out of there the entire area. And we certainly need the intelligence that we get when we work with so many countries, as this raid really shows quite clearly.
Let's circle back again. Just how much credit does the Trump administration deserve for this? We know back during the Obama administration, the takedown of bin Laden. Is this comparable to that? And just how significant is it?
I mean, certainly, if you're the president, you're handed a important decision, and if something like this goes wrong, then it's something that's publicized, you look horrible, and there's loss of life. So it's very bad in that regard. That's something a president has to think of. But this is really a matter of the military and our intelligence assets, multiple countries working with us, our allies, really staying on this. And I think that that is something that we must really celebrate as well. And that's why I say keeping a presence inside of Syria, even as small as it was, is very important, and keeping a small presence elsewhere. We get too lost in sometimes a idea of endless war. This wasn't a war area that we were located in. It was pacified. We were using it brilliantly.
Matthew R.J. Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy, thank you for giving your analysis.
Thank you.
Former White House National Security Advisor Charles Kupperman failed to show up today for a deposition on the impeachment inquiry. He asked a federal court whether he was illegally required to do so.
He was compelled to appear by a lawful congressional subpoena. Just within the last few days, of course, the district court has ruled that the impeachment inquiry is perfectly valid. Witnesses like Dr. Kupperman need to do their duty and show up.
The three House committees leading the closed-door inquiry have scheduled current and former National Security Council officials to testify this week. They're determining if President Trump violated his oath of office by asking Ukraine to investigate political rival Joe Biden and his family. President Trump says the Justice Department is about to begin a crackdown on violent crime.
Now, federal prosecutors are once again working closely with state and local law enforcement and all of the community leaders to marshal our resources, target crime in the most dangerous areas, and lock up violent offenders.
The president also touted his administration's efforts against illegal immigration. He says the wall between the U.S. and Mexico is being built at a rapid pace. Freshman Congresswoman Katie Hill from California announced her resignation Sunday. The House Ethics Committee was investigating the Democrat over allegations she had an inappropriate relationship with an aide. Hill spoke to our Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi in May.
I mean, I'm an openly bi woman. I'm the only one in the House of Representatives and the first LGBT woman from the state of California.
Hill voted for the Equality Act. It passed the House in May. The bill amends the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to designate gender as a new protected class, just like race, color, national origin, sex, disability, and religion. The U.S. bishops criticized the Equality Act for creating broad regulations that would harm society. The Senate is not expected to pass the bill. And California issues a state of emergency as wildfires burn out of control. The biggest blaze is only 5% contained as it burns through Sonoma County. Another fire on the west side of Los Angeles has grown to 500 acres. The wildfires are threatening around 10,000 residential and commercial buildings. At least 2 people are dead and over 100 more are wounded in clashes between anti-government protesters and security forces in Iraq. Authorities there have now imposed a nighttime curfew. The demonstrations are fueled by anger over corruption, economic stagnation, and poor public services. Pope Francis urges dialogue to solve the crisis in Lebanon.
Esorto tutti a ricercare le giuste soluzioni nella via del dialogo.
At his Sunday gathering, the Holy Father prayed the international community will support Lebanon as it seeks a solution to political unrest. Protest arose after the government announced new taxes on WhatsApp voice calls and messaging services. Pope Francis said his thoughts are especially with young people as they face the social, moral, and economic problems of their country. Leaders from the world's 3 major religions have joined forces against assisted suicide. The declaration came today at the Vatican. Pope Francis met with more than 24 other leaders from Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. In a joint statement, they said assisted suicide fundamentally contradicts the value of human life. It also is morally wrong. Instead, the leaders are calling for respectful care everywhere and for everyone. Coming up, an inside look at the Vatican Synod on the Amazon from one of the participants.
I think certainly there is a way forward.
Over the weekend, EWTN sat down with Cardinal Oswald Gracious of Mumbai, India. He's one of the Holy Father's closest advisors, and he also took part in the 3-week meeting on the Amazon this month. During the interview, the Cardinal told our Calm Flynn why he supports the ordination of married men in the region.
I think that the present canon law does make provision for this, the sense that it says it's an impediment if you have a wife to receive orders, but it's an impediment which can be dispensed by the Holy See, and it has been dispensed of. But I think there should be very clear criteria, conditions put. It should not be a one-man's decision. The whole conference must decide. I think certainly there is a way forward. Without celibacy so important and has to be retained, I think it's got to be preserved and protected and reinforced. But then there certainly are cases where you can give a dispensation.
And that dispensation, could that be applied in other parts of the world, like let's say your home country of India, where...
No, I mean, that's what I was saying. That's why, that's the reason exactly why I said this should be a decision of the conference. The whole country must decide. And the Holy See, which gives the dispensation, must be convinced that the reasons given by the country are adequate, and then the application should be not from one bishop, but from a group of bishops, a province.
And can you understand, again, when I was reading on social media, you know, people are fearful that it's going to take away centuries of church teaching and culture.
No.
And
when we had so many Anglican married pastors coming into the church, the Pope Benedict allowed, we gave a dispensation to get them to have them ordained in the Catholic Church. And we found a way, a modus vivendi, and it's working in certain ways. Therefore, you must be aware of the challenges, the dangers, and make sure it's a very select area where you're applying this. I think very clearly the bishops of Africa would say that this would not, we don't need this. In India, I would say we don't need this. And I think in Europe also, it's a different reason. But here, it's when they receive the sacrament once a year, twice a year, that's all. And then there is a real need, and then we can, a temporary solution for, we hope, a temporary problem.
I know you've spoke as well about the role of women in the church too.
Yes.
You were saying that you could see them as having a more
managerial
role in parishes.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm surprised that that's why I'm saying, if there were only a group of theologians, canonists, scripture scholars who studied together, we would find so much for. Women are doing so much, and there's not sufficient recognition. They could even be in charge of a parish community with a priest. So that's allowed by canon law.
And when you're talking to the Pope, even one-on-one, and you're talking about reform and you're advising him and you're talking about different issues, what is at the forefront of Pope Francis's mind when he's thinking of reform in the church?
Yeah, he really wants to see what's best for the church. I mean, there's no doubt, there's passionately. He sort of has an objective to reform the Curia and going ahead. He knows there would be obstacles in the way, and but right now, of course, the thing is how to make it effective.
We saw this week the news from the Vatican Bank and the question marks around a lot of the transactions going over the years. When you look at that, do you think that that kind of corruption in the Vatican can be weeded out?
Yeah, you know, now about this particular thing also, I have spoken to a few those involved in it. It seems to me, first of all, exaggerated and misunderstood. This is what I'm not defending anything, and misunderstood what happened. And I believe that, I mean, I've been told there's an explanation for everything, which would indicate that everything is above board. But I mean, I don't know the details. But we should really, I think it can be. There was lack of supervision perhaps before, but more communication, less secrecy, and more checks and balances, transparency, accountability. That's so important now. And I think we must get that back into every system in the church.
During that interview, Cardinal Gracious also spoke about the recent scandal at the Vatican Bank, his work with Pope Francis on reform, and his vision for the church in his native country of India. You can watch the full interview on our Facebook page. Just search for EWTN News Nightly. Up next, Britain's exit from the European Union is delayed until January. We have analysis. The European Union agrees to delay Brexit until the end of January. The offer comes just 3 days before Britain was due to become the first country ever to leave the 28-nation bloc. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has accepted the delay. But Johnson made the case for a general election in December, saying the current parliament had run its course and it was time to get Brexit done. After a testy debate in the House of Commons, lawmakers rejected Johnson's call to hold an early election as a way of breaking the political deadlock over the country's stalled departure from the EU. Joining me now is Hillary Fordwich, a global business development leader and president and founder of Strelmark LLC Business Development Consultants. Hillary, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure, Mark.
There are just as many people today saying this extension is a good thing as there are those saying this is an awful thing. So how should we view today's extension?
Well, actually, it's been very polarizing for the whole British nation. So if you ask 48% of the people who voted to remain, of course, it's a sort of a dreadful thing. If you ask people who wanted to leave, it's also a dreadful thing, and that's what the issue is. The leavers wanted to leave Brexit. That's what Brexit is all about. They wanted to leave the EU, and 52% of the British public back in 2016, of course, has voted to leave. And yet you've had this stalling and this delay for 3.5 years now, which has rather frustrated the whole British public. So the bottom line right now is a recent poll has said that 56% of those in Britain would like to see leaving. So the numbers have changed. The Labour Party knows the numbers have changed, and the dynamics mean that you've got more than a large percentage who want to now leave, but it's not necessarily a good thing for both sides. Businesses, of course, have suffered with the uncertainty, so there are many who are very frustrated.
And the EU actually referred to it as a flextension. What does that actually mean in terms of maybe doing something sooner than January?
Yes, what it means is, obviously, it's a play on extension and flexibility. So the extension is January 31st, as you mentioned. That's when the Brexit deadline now has been pushed back. It's the third time it's been pushed back, of course, this year, because it was going to be March 29th, and it was put back to October 31st, Halloween. Now it's been put back to January 31st. So that's what it means. It means that's the extension. The flex part of flextension, the flex part is that if Boris Johnson, the current Prime Minister, if Boris Johnson does get agreement that his deal, his package for Brexit passes, then Brexit could happen as early as December 1st or January 1st. Though both scenarios are unlikely, it's more likely to have a general election because he's not going to get a majority probably to pass it. But that's what flextension means.
And what should we keep an eye on as this now, goes to the British Parliament and as everything develops? What's going to happen?
Well, actually, things are developing as we speak, almost literally. And that is that the SNP, the Scottish National Party, as well as the DUP, they have actually agreed and broken ranks. Sorry, they've broken ranks with Jeremy Corbyn, who's the leader of the Labour Party, and they're agreeing to perhaps vote for a general election. So now you've got the opposition party to Boris Johnson and the opposition sort of breaking ranks, and that's what's very important that's happening now. So what we should expect is most likely a general election. Boris Johnson is calling for it on December 12th, but the SNP, the Scottish National Party, and the Liberal Democrats, they're calling for it to be more like December 9th. Why? Because the universities in the UK break up that week, and students will have already been home by December 12th. They want it 2 or 3 days earlier on the 9th because most students in the UK, unlike in the US, they register to vote in their university towns. So if they're still at university, then they will be able to vote there. If they've gone home for the holiday season, the Christmas holidays, they won't be voting. And the student youth vote was very much more in support of remaining and supported the Labour Party.
What impact have these extensions had on trade deals, on businesses? What's the actual impact?
Well, like all issues that create uncertainty for business, uncertainty is never good for business. Businesses need to plan. Businesses need to develop budgets, and they need to have concrete strategies. However, what I would say is the impact has been not the doom and gloom that all the naysayers predicted, because it was predicted that the pound would plummet and jobs would be leaving London in the thousands and all the financial global companies would be taking their employees to Dublin, to Frankfurt.
Bad.
Yeah, it sounded ghastly, and it hasn't happened. The pound has actually held rather steady. It's trading in the 120s still. It hasn't plummeted. It's held very steady. What I would say is that if you look at most economists, they basically say that all of the uncertainty is baked in right now, that businesses have planned globally around it. The CEOs and the global leaders I speak to all basically have planned for this. So while the politicians can't get things done, business people have planned around uncertainty.
There is a lot to unpack here. Thank you for helping out just a little bit as we
Pleasure,
break
Mark.
this down. Hillary Fordwich, President and founder of Strelmark LLC Business Development Consultants. Thank you for coming on, sharing your insights.
Pleasure, Mark.
We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Mark Irons. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.